Now, you just stated that the United States is a large export nation. Recently, you had a back and forth with economist Peter Schiff on Judge Napolitano's Freedom Watch, discussing, China possibly dumping the United States dollars. There's no reason for people to have foreign reserves in U.S. dollars, I believe, is if I'm paraphrasing what Schiff said. But basically, he said that the United States doesn't manufacture anything and we don't export anything, and that the foreign nations of the world would do best by cutting us loose and dumping their dollars. And you disagreed with him.
Well, he may have some interesting insights into monetary policy and the need to rein in the Federal Reserve and so on. That's one thing. He was uninformed when it came to international trade. He said, and I think he said precisely this, we don't make anything in this country. That's wrong. I don't know why someone would say something so uninformed. Even if you look at China, he said everything is made in China. Well, if you take 2007, the last year for which there's complete data for both countries, China had about $1.3 trillion in exports. The United States had over $1.6 trillion in exports. And remember, there's 308 million people in the United States, 1.3 billion people in China, so a billion more.
Big difference.
Our per capita productivity in this country is gigantic, and the U.S. in fact exports huge amounts of goods. They're usually not the things you buy in the sense that when you buy an iPod it says made in China. Well, actually, a small percentage of the value was added in China. It was designed in California. That's where a huge amount of the value is added. In effect, our export was the design.
Mm-hmm.
In China, people added the manufacturing component, which is added value, but a very small percentage of the total value of an iPod. The U.S. also exports a huge amount of industrial machinery. Think about Caterpillar tractor, John Deere, and so on. It's gigantic. I don't personally own a Caterpillar tractor. I do have an iPod, so I see that. But since I don't buy Caterpillar tractors, I don't notice that these are manufactured in the United States. And then, of course, also services as well, which are part of U.S. exports, and engineering, design, software, and so on and so forth. So the U.S. has a lot of export industries, and in fact, a very, very productive economy. We are not just living all on credit. That particular claim is false. The federal government is living too much on credit. They're spending too much money and borrowing it. We have a budget deficit. That's a very serious issue to be addressed by cutting spending. Mm-hmm. But it's not the case that our economy somehow is unproductive. This is a very productive group of people in the United States.
Are there any policies that Obama is currently espousing that call for protectionism?
Yes. Well, the first point was the Buy American provisions, and this again is very dangerous. They've backpedaled away from it. They said, well, we didn't mean it in quite that way, but the Buy America provisions as a part of the so-called stimulus means pork barrel spending, just handing around money to favored constituencies and so on, comes with these Buy America provisions. And there have been really disturbing stories that have great resonance in other countries, notably Canada, the biggest trading partner of Americans, is our happy, friendly neighbors to the north, Canada, that Canadian manufactured products have been extracted from government spending products when they found there was a pump made in Canada. They took it out and put in an American pump. Well, imagine the impact that this has in Canada. First off, you're doing something stupid domestically by paying more for the pump than they would have paid for the one they originally had in there, so it was just wasteful. And second, now the Canadian government is beginning to impose restrictions on importation of American goods. This is really shooting yourself in the foot. This is simply not smart. And setting aside, there's the liberty question. I should be free to trade with whomever I want on the terms that we mutually agree to. Even if all we want to look at is the question of increasing wealth and prosperity, protectionism is very foolish. And the Obama administration has been edging in that direction, especially with this kind of hidden or stealth protectionism, government spending that comes with Buy American provisions. And by the way, expect this to happen now that we've had General Motors effectively taken over by the U.S. government.
Right.
We're going to be told, well, they should buy all of their products only from Americans and so on. This will have a very bad ripple effect throughout the economy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that actually leads me to my next question. What does the collapse of General Motors mean for the American economy? And are you optimistic that the government's going to be able to turn them around, or are we going to see more Trabants in the future?
I think we'll see very expensive Trabants in the future. The old Trabi, as it was called, I actually drove in them in East Germany, was actually pretty cheap. And you got what you paid for. It had a lawnmower engine with a basically little plastic shell around it.
But you could sneak out a few capitalists across the
You occasionally could, yes.
in there, yeah.
If they were very cramped and
Right.
occupied a small space. But what we should expect now is increasing politicization of what should be economic or business or commercial decisions.
Right.
That there's going to be this concern, well, it's in Senator so-and-so's state or Congressman so-and-so's district. How does this play out on a committee and so on? We just saw now GM spokesman being brought before congressional committees to justify the decisions about closing dealerships. Well, I expect a lot more of that. Now, if you think that the U.S. economy should be run like the post office, with all of the efficiency that we expect from the post office and friendly service, then this is a great idea. Imagine also the post office, you're too young, but before Federal Express. It was really horrifying then. Long lines. The competition from Federal Express, UPS, and so on, and email, has made the government post office a little more competitive. For instance, only 30 years after private enterprise figured it out, they started doing those adhesive stamps you didn't have to lick. 30 years those had been available in the private sector, and finally the government said, hey, how come you have to lick our stamps? And so they started little peel-off ones. So innovations will be about 30 years late. General Motors should have been allowed to go into Chapter 11 bankruptcy from the get-go. Their share price had already gone down to essentially zero, which means that the equity holders had already lost all the value of their capital. That's the time when you go into Chapter 11 bankruptcy and reorganization. It would have meant a couple of hundred top management people would have lost their jobs. Right. So we have spent billions and billions and billions of dollars to protect a few hundred jobs. One of the most disturbing things about this, though, that really shocked me, and I was more shocked by the fact other people weren't shocked, was when the President of the United States personally demanded the firing of the head of an, at that time, nominally private company. And I felt we turned a corner with that. That the President is now saying, oh no, the head of Kmart should be this person, and the head of Walmart should be that person, and the head of Citibank, and so on. It's actually not very Soviet. It's crony capitalism. It's old-fashioned corruption. And it's not the way that we should want to live in this country, in which the President gets to appoint his buddies or fire people who've annoyed him. That's not his job. That's what the market's for.